Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Confirmed with broadcast.
Okay, members, good morning, and I confirm that we do have quorum and the meeting of the Committee for Communities is now in session. I call the meeting to order, and to Fáilte Rómha Lig, you are all very welcome to this morning's meeting. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off? Mobile tablet devices can be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. Password details are available there in the gallery for anyone who wants to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no recordings or photographs of these proceedings may be taken. Can I remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Can members also please consider to use tablets discreetly and be aware of cameras when using tablet device, and to remind members about the sensitivity of these microphones. And finally, I'd remind members of responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. I will declare that I own a private property from which I gain private rent, and also I'm a trustee of a charity. Yes, Andy?
Same chair.
Yep, thank you.
Trustee of the charity.
Yep, go ahead, Melissa. Thank you.
Trustee of Nice Colin Jerica.
Yep. Okay, thank you everyone. So moving on then to apologies, Clerk. Are we aware of any apologies? Thank you. Chair's business then, folks. I welcome the Minister announcing on Tuesday that he hopes to legislate to extend the benefit cap mitigations post-March 2025 in a matter of weeks. He said that he hoped that the information will be with the Executive imminently. However, I would hope that the committee will see the review report imminently as well, in order for us to get the full picture before legislative proposals come before us. So I propose therefore that we write to the Department to ask that the statutory review of mitigations is brought to the committee as soon as possible. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Following on from last week's briefing from departmental officials in relation to gambling reform, I noted a news report yesterday that the Labour Government plans to introduce a statutory levy on gambling companies, mandating an annual contribution of 100 million. Apparently that levy would be to fund research, provide education around the issue, with the largest percentage to go to the treatment related to gambling harms. That announcement set out the potential for implementation in April 2025. So I propose that we write to the Parliament to ask whether it will be possible to bring forward the same regulations here, because I think that would be a useful element of that. Members agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, members, draft minutes there. Refer you to draft minutes from the meeting on 21st November at page 6 of the meeting pack. Are members content to agree the minutes of 21st November as drafted?
Agreed, yeah.
Thank you. Members, matters arising then, members. So you have been provided there with a summary table of matters arising at page 18, and there's an additional summary table at page 3 of your table papers. So can I ask members if there are any issues that they wish to raise there in relation to matters arising? Yeah, I just want to raise there the timescales for interaction. It's useful in the context that the committee are keen to ensure that we can carry out that very robust and thorough scrutiny. So that's welcome, and also around the discretionary support, again, that particular relevance there, the figure on the benefit cap payment, which we've mentioned already, 2,160 claimants at a total cost of 2.4 million. Any other items members wish to draw out? Brian?
Well, just when you refer to that, I thought that was a useful guide on the timescale for interaction. So just at point 18, my reading of that is that the Minister should notify the Chair if he's going to make an oral statement, but he isn't required to actually provide the text in advance. I think that's my reading of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's and at the earliest possible as well. So, but there's a whole lot more within that I think it's useful.
No, but obviously it is helpful, and generally we do. But that's my reading of that he's not actually required to, or he or she is not required to provide the text of oral statements in advance.
Yeah, which of course doesn't provide them in the spirit of cooperation from doing so. Yeah. Andy.
Yeah, Chair, it's just on the welfare supplementary payment waiver, and you members may recall when we had officials in, I did ask them about providing the committee with details as to the numbers affected, and they didn't appear to have them at that time, but the response obviously is very detailed in the processes and the checks and balances that they say that they deploy, which would indicate to me that they should be able to identify the numbers affected. So would it be agreeable if we go back to them and just ask them for those details? And also, I'm a bit disappointed, obviously, given that this came and arose from an issue that I highlighted from a constituent who will not be captured in this. And obviously I understand the whole issue around retrospective, but they do fall into the intent behind this policy, but they will not be covered by it due to the failure of this place to recognise the issue at the outset.
Yep, okay, members agreed?
Agreed.
Yep. Ciara?
Particularly, there's kind of 3 items, and it's focused on housing. The 4.3, the housing executive emergency accommodation. I'm sure we all heard over the weekend. Issues in relation to trying to provide temporary accommodation, and like we acknowledge that the housing system has got unprecedented demand for emergency accommodation, particularly over the weekends. Would it be useful to get clarity as to whether housing executive were able to provide offers of accommodation to all those present? As who presented over the weekend, we heard on the radio about 15 cases. Supposedly there was no accommodation, so it'd be useful just to find that out. And basically too, at what point is the current temporary accommodation at saturation point? Where they don't have enough capacity to offer temporary accommodation. Are we aware? I think we need to keep abreast of that. And I know I met with Grania a few weeks back, and she had mentioned that Derry City and Strabane Council area were at saturation point. So what does that actually mean? I suppose, and likewise too, and I know I have raised this with Grania with regards to the standards of temporary accommodation. It would be useful to see clarity from the department on what steps they are pursuing to ensure that any facilities used for temporary accommodation are of an acceptable standard. If that could be. And then the one on the 4.7, decarbonisation of housing executive homes. I think we acknowledge obviously the stated intentions of this response in terms of the need to ensure that we improve energy efficiency and carry out adequate retrofitting and decarbonisation measures. Myself and Kelly were obviously at the Housing Rights Private Rental Conference last week with Julie Lavery from the department, and there was a consultation held through a workshop on the minimum energy efficiency standards, whereby they outlined that the department is scoping out the policy document for a consultation framework. We practically all kind of know that the average is basically a standard D rating, but we do have a considerable amount of older properties that fall well below this. So it'd be useful if the department could confirm when the 2023 Housing Executive House Condition Survey will be published. Is there a date for that? And then details in terms of, I'd love to know the thinking just of the Minister and the Department in terms of what they feel is a suitable baseline for an EPC rating to be striving for across our housing stock. And particularly I asked that question at the All-Party Group for Fuel Poverty on Tuesday, and they very much thought, and I think it was generally agreed, and Kelly and yourself, Colm, were at it, that it was a C. But it'd be useful just to find out what the department's thinking on that. And just finally, I think there was just one other. Just in relation to 4.9, the landlord registration scheme, and I know I had mentioned it at our last meeting, that they are looking to review the whole IT system and invest in the IT system. And it would be important that any new register that will go forward post-March to include data in terms of the number of housing stock within each of an individual landlord's own housing portfolio, and if linking registration to standards is to make it a more meaningful tool for compliance, and particularly when our local councils will be taking on that role. So I think it would be important for the department just to consider how they will improve these, and likewise minimum fitness standards and moving forward for housing going forward. So is that type of information going to be included within this new IT system? So that would be kind of the 3 areas of housing that I would be keen to be more informed about, if that's okay.
Members all agreed with those items?
I know it was brought up last week, this landlord's registration, just to reiterate what Ciara has said. I haven't seen any consultation on what the content would be. It would be really good to find out from Lisburn and Castlereagh Council, who obviously are working on behalf of all of the councils, who they have corresponded with regards to setting the data that's being collected. Was it landlords? Was it Renters' Voice, for instance? Who was it? But it would be very useful to see the headings. I know this is quite specific details, but it would be very useful to find out the headings within that data capture. Landlords have said, following the Housing Rights Private Rental Sector Conference, that they're very concerned that in identifying their name against their properties, that they could be targeted security risks. But in saying that, I still think that it is relevant for private renters to know who the landlord is of each of the properties, because they may or may not have had a good or bad experience with somebody in the past. But it would be very helpful if Lisburn and Castlereagh could share what way they're planning to present the information. If that information will only be available to councils, or will actually private renters be able to access the information? Because if they're listing out the standards of accommodation that landlords are complying with, which is great, I think private renters would like to see that if they're going to rent from someone. So it would be good to get more detail on that. I appreciate that there's a project board, but the fact that we can't scrutinise, we don't want them to bring forward something that later we have to ask them to correct. It would be good to find out where they're at this stage, and if there are suggestions that we could put forward to improving the data capture.
Members content with that? Yeah, useful. In terms of item 4.6 there, members, the Social Fund winter fuel payment, just to once again, I suppose, acknowledge that welcome that the Finance Minister has allocated 17 million to that. And also I do want to acknowledge within the statement that the Minister had indicated that there was an increase in 76.3 in pension credit applications, 76.3%. in pension credit applications. I think that's good work on behalf of the department. I think it also underlines how important that work is, the fact that so many, that there was such an increase, and I would encourage the department to continue to explore that, to ensure that everyone is getting all the benefits that they're entitled to, whether that's make the call or the specific on the pension credit. But I think that's very useful. I think it also does flag up the fact this is a one-off for this year, flags up the need to really get the fuel poverty strategy brought forward and the anti-poverty strategies so that we can see going into the future a more stable support system and around people at the present time in the cost of living. Melissa, I'm just checking, are you trying to indicate there, are you trying to come in online at all, Melissa? Let me check. We're not hearing you, Melissa. So listen, check your volume and I'll come to Andy and I'll check back with you. Andy, please go ahead.
Chair, just on that uptake figure that you'd mentioned, and obviously on the surface that is extremely positive, but maybe perhaps we could drill down into that a bit further in terms of how many of those applications resulted in a successful award of pension credit, how many of those applicants will have their award backdated, the 3-month period that we discussed with officials previously, and then did that enable them to fall within the winter fuel payment, just to get more detail on that.
Yep, thank you. Members content? Melissa, checking back with you again. No, I think Melissa's okay. Kelly, go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Melissa. I think you're on volume now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
No, it's okay. I didn't have anything to say other than the fact that my volume had gone completely here. It's not my phone now, but then up in the message, the host has muted you, you know.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on that as best as possible. Kelly?
Chair, we've had in the matters arising communication from DFC about the decarbonisation of housing executive homes. My concern is that, is the department just looking at housing executive homes? You know, what is the decarbonisation strategy going forward for housing? Can we perhaps ask the department to clarify if it's their role? Now, it may well be Economy's role, but is it their role to consider the decarbonisation strategy for housing across Northern Ireland? Because I'm very concerned that we have a mixture of different types of homes. So we certainly have housing executive, we've got social housing, and we have private owners, private landlords indeed. And I'm just wondering, will they be bringing forward a decarbonisation of homes strategy or consideration? Because we can decarbonise the housing executive homes. Thank goodness that's happening. It'll take a while, but it will happen. But what happens across Northern Ireland in order for the department that has responsibility for housing, what's going to happen with all of the other homes in Northern Ireland? I'm just very aware that we seem to be, the department seems to be very concentrating on the organisations that it has primary responsibility for, the arm's length bodies, but actually this would be an executive approach towards decarbonisation, and housing is one of the main ones that causes issues. Of course, we know that there's others. Transport, for instance, is a huge issue, but can we just ask the department, are they considering that wider decarbonisation piece for housing, all housing?
Okay, the members content with that? Clerk, you have the detail on that. Ciara?
I just wanted to raise under the 4.8, and I know I appreciate the additional information that we received on the affordable warmth scheme. I would just like to ask whether or not the department of the applications, and there was over 3,500 issued, which is great. So it shows the amount of people and the scale of people that need support and help, and just, 1,500 completed applications, but only 840 plus were eligible. Do they track the information of those that weren't eligible? What is it exactly they required and made them unineligible, where they didn't reach the threshold for the grant? It would be really interesting to find out, because that's a core cohort of applicants who put in an application form, have some level of need regarding thermal efficiency within their home. So I don't know if that's tracked or not. It would be useful just to ask if the department does track it or if any information on it. And
sorry, can I clarify that? So do they track the information for those deemed
eligible,
yeah, and why they don't meet the threshold?
Yeah. And then just in relation to, and obviously it was noted that the affordable warmth business case covers it'll be March 26. But I suppose it's clear with regards to what is the current budget available following October, in terms of whether this will enable all applicants that are currently in the system that are eligible to the scheme to be considered for funding. And I know it's quite difficult, and they've mentioned that, because you don't know what the cost will be. But it would just quite interesting just to find out what is the budget now finally left available for those that are currently eligible this year for the grant. And then just, I suppose, just following obviously the Fuel Poverty Awareness Day, and we do look forward to seeing the draft fuel poverty strategy. But I think it's really critical to consider other alternative investment that is available, particularly under the European Regional Development Fund, and I know the Housing Secretary done excellent work on that. That was found for retrofitting homes. I think it was well over 1,000 homes, to reduce the carbon emissions and lowering people's fuel bills and improving heat and comfort for our residents. So is there any further work or potential to secure investment under ERDF funding for that?
Members content? Yep. I just want to note also 4.12 there, members, the Shared Prosperity Fund, and I note the update. It is disappointing that the British Government decision has reduced SPF by 40% for 24-25, and I would be concerned about the impact this will have on programmes that support people accessing the labour market, indeed, which goes against the grain of many other initiatives. Previous Tory governments have also failed to replace EU funding with an annual shortfall of 30 million already, and now the Labour government would appear to be adopting a similar approach. So there is a need obviously for a medium-term plan which provides adequate funding that has greater involvement for the executive, but in the short term I think it's crucial that groups receive confirmation of funding for next year as soon as possible. And I know that we've also been contacted by groups who are expressing concerns around some of the other issues within the budget, around NIC and the impact that's having. So I think that's a kind of a further complication for those groups, if members are just to note that. Kelly?
Yeah, and Chair, to be honest, this is in support of the department. We noticed that the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, even in the extension period, the Department for Communities doesn't have local control over that. I know from the past, speaking to officials in the department, that they have asked so that we can have more Northern Ireland specific use of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. We're hoping that there will be something else, that may fill the void after the extension year. But it was just to, I think we should write to the department to say that we are in support of whatever the future funding is, that the department would have local control over that, because they are the experts to know exactly what Northern Ireland needs, and not all of the UK Shared Prosperity objectives, to be honest, were relevant here. We had much more specific targeted need for instance, getting people with disabilities into employment. So I think it could we perhaps write in support of the department to say that we would hope that in the work that they have going forward, that they have the support that the committee would like the Department for Communities to be the local lead on that, as opposed to it coming from the Westminster Department.
I would agree.
Chair, we haven't heard back from the Westminster Department, I take it. We had asked for details of what funding.
Not yet.
Right, yeah.
Okay, members, thank you. So moving on then, members, to agenda item 5, correspondence, and the memo for which is at page 90, and there's a table correspondence memo at page 18 of your table papers. So any issues there, members, that members wish to draw out in relation to today's correspondence? Yes,
I suppose the main one is 5.6 in regarding the employment support scheme. Obviously there is, I personally would have, but I'm sure there's some great concern out there regarding just the impact of closing the scheme, particularly on the people who use it. So it's more clarity should be sought on exactly why the scheme doesn't deliver value for money, and what would be the department's replacement for the scheme. So it would be even useful to get an oral briefing on that, just to get clarity around the reasoning behind the EQIA. And I know obviously because no one mentioned it at the EQA, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not really, really valuable and useful for so many people. So I would just love more clarity around the reasoning behind it, if that could happen through a briefing or written response through the department.
Yeah,
Thank you. Brian?
I would support that. I would think we should get a briefing on it. I mean, it closed in 2006 to new applicants. And 23-24 it supported 295 participants. But then it says it offers subsidised employment to 249 people. So I'm not sure is that a reduction or is that in a different capacity. So there's still a substantial number of people,
Yeah.
and if it has it literally not had any new applicants for the last 18 years? So, and then given our earlier discussion about the shared prosperity funding, this could be a double whammy of reduction of support for people with disabilities into employment. So,
Or a triple whammy, indeed.
If we could get a briefing, I would support that.
Written or in person, are we seeking?
I'd prefer in person.
Preferably.
Yeah, if we
Yes.
can manage that, yeah. Kelly?
Just moving on, 5.12, where we have to consider whether or not we get a briefing from the National Students' Union Northern Ireland. I think we should. One of the issues about the future work of the Private Tenancies Act, the Stage 2, is the exemptions from those who would get perhaps longer periods of notice or eviction. And I just think that students with the short-term leasing that they go through, that we do need to have a chat with those guys. Most of the HMOs in Belfast are student accommodation, so I think it'd be important to get representation from the students themselves before we take any future work on that.
Yeah, I also think I've met with them recently as well, and they have actually some really interesting ideas around student ownership of accommodation and things like that, which I think is to their credit. They're working on kind of looking at other alternatives, so yeah, be in support of that. Just to note there, issue item 5.5 from the Committee for Finance, read terms of reference for inquiry into the banking and financial services. I think it's useful, and I welcome the fact that inquiry will look into community wealth building and community owned banks. I think that's a good direction to be looking. I also want to just check, maybe in terms of the NI Opera have requested that they are seeking to be included as part of the arts event. I'm just wanting to check.
Yes,
Are
they're
they?
on the list.
They're
yeah.
on the list, okay. So thank you, members. Any other items of correspondence members wish to flag either in this or tabled? Go ahead, Brian.
Just briefly, do we have a session on student accommodation in our forward plan? I'm just looking here, I don't see it.
No.
Right. It's just, it is an area in which change is happening, and with the growth of, particularly in Belfast, purpose-built student accommodation, what impact is that having in traditional areas of student accommodation, Holy Land, Stranmillis and so on.
Yeah.
And likewise in Londonderry, the growth of student population, what impact is happening there in housing. And the purpose-built accommodation does seem to be popular, and there's a demand for it, and it's also regenerating derelict areas, particularly in the North Belfast end of the city centre. So it'll be interesting to get an analysis, of what changes are happening there.
Go ahead, Ciara.
No, just one wee comment, just in relation to the stakeholder pre-engagement for the arts culture. Could I just double check if the Greater Shantallow Community Arts are on that? They do a vast array of arts and culture projects across the city, and it's a community-led one, so it'd be useful to have. Sure, they're on that list. Thank you.
Okay, members, thank you. So are members otherwise content to note the correspondence memos as attached? Yep, thank you. Members, moving on to item 6, which is Child Support Enforcement Bill. And we're moving on to our consideration of the committee report. So I would remind members that we are focusing on the text of the report only, as the team will then address any formatting issues once the text is agreed. A copy of the draft report is contained for you there at page 363. I will ask for comments and then agreement on each section of the report, and so therefore we'll start off with the powers and membership, which are at pages 365 to 366 of your pack. Do members have any comments, or are they content with this section as drafted?
Content. Yeah.
Thank you, members. Content. Moving on, executive summary, which is at pages 386 to 386 to 369. It says here it must be 389, I presume. So certainly starting at 386. Do members have any comments, or are they content with this section as drafted?
Content, yeah.
Thank you, members. Content. Thank you. Introduction then at pages 370 to 371. Do members have any comments, or are they content with the introduction section as drafted?
Content.
Thank you. Context and overview of the bill on pages 372 to 374. Do members have any comments, or are they content with this section as drafted?
Content.
Content, thank you. Committee recommendations and consideration of wider issues, 375 to 378. Do members have any comments, or are they content with the section as drafted?
Content.
Content.
Thank you, members. Committee consideration of the bill, pages 379 to 383. Do members have any comments, or are they content with this section as drafted?
Content, yeah.
Content, thank you. Committee deliberations on the bill, pages 384 to 388. Do members have any comments, or are they content with this section as drafted?
Content, yeah.
Thank you, members. Content. Clause by clause consideration of the bill at pages 389 to 390. Do members have any comments, or are they content with this section as drafted?
Content, yeah.
Thank you. Appendices, pages 392. Do members have any comments, or are they content with this section as drafted?
Content.
Thank you. Are members content that the minutes from today's meeting are included in the report?
Content, yeah.
Thank you. So members, then we are moving on then to, so are members content to agree that the report is final, pending the tidying up of formatting issues only, and once those are done, that it is then printed?
Great.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, members. So members, this concludes committee stage of the bill. I would like to thank you all for your in-depth scrutiny of the bill, and would like to put on record our thanks to all those that made submissions and gave oral evidence. I'd also like to again thank the departmental officials and our Assembly Bill Office for their hard work and help in working our way through the bill. And I also want to thank the committee staff here for assisting us on our consideration of all of that. And I look forward to the debate on this bill at consideration stage. So thank you, members. So members, moving on then to our departmental briefing this morning, which is on the draft anti-poverty strategy. This is an oral briefing, members. There are no papers provided, and I'd now like to welcome the following officials to our meeting. So we are joined this morning by Emer Morelli. Welcome, Emer. And Emer is the Deputy Secretary in the Engaged Communities Group. We also have Paul Gamble, who is head of the Poverty Policy Team, and Carol Savage, who is Deputy Director of the Central Policy Division. So, Emer, welcome to all of you this morning. We're delighted, I think, to see you. It's an issue that we have been raising. I think it was maybe the first question that was asked in this committee. So we're absolutely delighted now to have some further information coming forward. So I'd like to invite you, Emer, to go ahead with an opening statement, and then we'll get to members' questions. Thank you.
Chair. We're very grateful to the committee to have the opportunity to appear this morning. The anti-poverty strategy is a key priority for the Minister and the Department. Work on the anti-poverty strategy is ongoing as we seek to develop effective and sustainable solutions to tackle poverty across Northern Ireland. I'd like to begin by providing some brief background on the work to date and an update on the progress before giving the committee the chance to ask any questions you may have. As the committee will be aware, work on the strategy has been ongoing for a considerable period of time. A refresh and review of that work was undertaken by the Minister when he came into office. The refresh was built on previous work that had been undertaken by both the expert panel and the co-design groups in identifying approaches to tackling poverty and deprivation in our society. As part of this refresh, officials have also considered a range of other evidence and research, and in particular, I would highlight some of the research and statistical work that the Department has carried out. Specifically, the research paper provided by our research and statisticians, a scoping review of the literature on poverty in Northern Ireland. This evidence set out in this research paper is available on the departmental website, and I'm happy to provide a copy to the committee as well. The refresh has allowed us to develop an updated approach that is underpinned by a robust statistical and factual approach. This complements the previous co-design work. It also helps in ensuring that we are focused on tackling the root causes of poverty and remain focused on interventions which will make a long-term and sustainable difference to poverty in Northern Ireland. Ultimately, the final content of the strategy will be a matter for the Executive to consider. However, as the Minister has previously stated, we are now working towards a strategy with an underlying approach of tackling three key areas. The strategy will aim to minimise the risk of people falling into poverty, mitigate the impact of poverty on people's lives, and work with people to help exit poverty. Each of these three pillars will be supported by a range of programmes and individual actions which will aim to make a material difference under their respective pillars. The Minister wrote to executive colleagues in September 2024, asking them to nominate representatives from their respective departments to sit on a reconstituted cross-departmental working group to consider the strategic approach. Nominations were received, and officials initially engaged in a range of bilateral meetings on a one-to-one basis with each department. Discussions considered the broad approach and further actions under each of the three key pillars. I would state at this point that the work of the co-design group and the expert advisory panel informed those discussions. A meeting of the cross-departmental working group took place on Monday the 18th of November. At this meeting, representatives discussed the strategic approach to strategic delivery and worked to identify the key actions that they can contribute to the overall cooperative and coordinated approach to tackling poverty. Officials within all departments, including DFC, are now considering the strategic level programmes and actions which will form the heart of the anti-poverty strategy. When this work is completed, these actions will be provided to our department to consider and pull together a single unified approach under the strategic framework I've outlined, and will be brought together in a single paper for the executive to consider. The paper will allow the executive to consider both the overall approach to the anti-poverty strategy and the strategic actions which underpin that work, and final decisions on the content and implementation of the anti-poverty strategy will be subject to executive agreement, and we would welcome any questions the committee have.
Okay, thank you, Emer. I suppose a couple from me first, and then I'll go to members. Yeah. So the Minister, just to quickly check, the Minister stated he intends publishing the strategy in January. Can you confirm that's still the case?
The Minister intends bringing the paper to the executive in January and publishing as soon as possible after that.
Okay. When the Minister was here previously, he said he had made some significant changes to the draft strategy, and when he came into office, to make it more realistic. Can you outline what those changes were?
The changes have been informed, as I say, by the work that we've been using from the co-design team and the expert advisory panel, and then this new review that we've done. So the main changes are in format and function. So we have taken it into these three main pillars that we are working to, and that will drive the actions underneath the pillars. The main changes that we're looking to also implement and augment is to align with the wellbeing framework from the Programme for Government and ensure that this strategy speaks to the other strategies that are ongoing across the executive to deliver Programme for Government, and that we are learning also from the PAC recommendations around aligning and delivering maximum benefit. So the changes that we are talking about are functional in nature rather than the actions. And I would stress, Chair, the actions in the strategy will belong to the individual departments that are responsible for those actions, but we want to make sure that it's a collective response.
And how will you monitor those actions in other departments?
And this is where we're working very closely with colleagues in NISRA and TEO as they are developing the wellbeing framework. And we want to make sure that the indicators that we are using are recognised indicators and work across the piece. So that is a piece of work that's ongoing. So I can't give you that final view today, but it's something that we're very cognizant of as we've learned from the PAC report on child poverty.
And can we be sure that, or can you give us a commitment that when that work is drafted, that you will come back to committee with that detail around that monitoring?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And also, can I just say, and just to declare that I am a member of the PAC, but the recent PAC report on child poverty called for the strategy to have time-bound targets, an implementation plan and tracked outcomes, and that's touching on what we just talked about, to ensure the strategy is effective in alleviating poverty. Can you confirm if this strategy will have those elements?
That's the key purpose of the strategy and what the Minister has required of us, that the strategy is practical, useful and works. So we are not developing a list of actions that aren't linked, that aren't proven to deliver.
I accept that, but time-bound targets, for example, will it have time-bound targets?
So that's what we are working with the other departments on.
Okay.
To ensure, and other departments have to be content when they sign up to the strategy that that's what they are bringing forward and that they have the budget and the wherewithal to deliver.
Yeah. And I take it that DFC will be challenging other departments that this is central or important, as you have flagged up, in terms of delivering on the wellbeing within the Programme for Government. So the department will take a robust approach to ensuring that other departments are meeting their targets, setting their targets and meeting them and implementing them.
So that's where we're working on the governance at the moment. The department is the lead department, and of course we will take that responsibility absolutely seriously, but we want to make sure that we're using all governance levers available to us, and aligning with PFG and the overall executive approach to monitoring. So we want to make sure that this is something that is active, that everyone that needs to see it sees it and understands their role in it, and that we use the maximum powers available to us to deliver. We don't want to go back where we have a list of tick boxes against a long list of actions that on paper are being delivered, but the impact of those actions isn't being monitored. And that's where we are investing time and effort in making sure that this is right.
And I think that learning and that monitoring of those impacts and ensuring that there's review around all of that is crucial. So I'll go to members' questions then. I have Kelly first.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. I am busting to actually see this anti-poverty strategy, and I'm just wondering on that basis then if it would be possible. We've had sight of the housing supply strategy clearly embargoed until the executive obviously has approval or makes their comments on that. Would there be a possibility, given the precedence is now set, that we could have a copy of the anti-poverty strategy, obviously when it's embargoed, not for public discussion, while the executive are considering it?
So, in line with the President, I will take that back to Minister and seek his approval.
Thank you. Just like the Chair has raised there, I'm a little bit concerned. In the Chamber, when we talked about different strategies, the Minister has highlighted that it will be for other committees outside of this committee to monitor the actions, say, of the Department of Health or the Department of Economy in their strategy deliveries. I'm a little bit concerned because, as you say, you're working on this at the moment, how the monitoring and evaluation will happen. We've had this in the past where other departments are supposed to come together to deliver outcomes, and to be quite frank, when times are tough with money, the Department for Communities elements just fall to the lowest point in the pile. So are you considering what will happen if other departments do not invest in delivery outcomes or delivery indicators in order to achieve the anti-poverty strategy? What role will the Department for Communities therefore have in holding those departments to account?
That is the key issue at the moment from our department's perspective. With budgets, as you say, the way they are, we want every department that's signing up into the anti-poverty strategy actions to be totally committed and give that commitment to us, but we also want the executive commitment in behind, and that's where we're looking at the best governance model. So prior to this, we had a subgroup of the executive, a ministerial subgroup of the executive. We haven't moved to re-establish that at this point, but it is something that we may wish to consider. We don't want to be over bureaucratic either, so we want to use the indicators that are available to us, and that if there's gaps we need to identify those indicators, but we want to make sure that we have as tight a governance on this as possible, and that we have an escalation as well from our own department as needed into the executive. This is an executive strategy.
I'm glad to hear you saying it's an executive strategy. So looking forward, there's a lot of it's the transparency piece just on this that I'm very keen on. It's making those other stakeholders accountable for actions so that we can actually reduce poverty in Northern Ireland. Is there an intention then in the future that there may well be joint applications for budget lines so that we can see the proactive work together? I'm imagining, for instance, anti-poverty, there's going to be a lot of investment needed from health and from communities together, for instance, on programmes. Will there be, or is there any consideration on that joint budget application process? Because at the moment we see every department applying in their silos for budget, but we don't see that cross-departmental application. Is there any consideration to that?
It is something when we see the final actions that are coming out from the other departments that we will need to look at, and it was a recommendation in the PAC as well around the pooling of resources and how we drive that forward. We do have many examples of collaborative partnership and funding already, where they're available. We will highlight those. Obviously, we're aligning very closely with Managing Public Money and its advice around this as well, and the accountability of individual accounting officers. But I think the lessons we've learned from the Child Poverty Report and PAC is at the forefront of our minds as we look at the governance. So I'm not trying to be flippant. It is something that we are giving a lot of thought to and working with partners on because we want to get it right. I think another lesson that we learned from the PAC, and the chairs touched on it, was the ability to update, reflect, revise as we go, and make sure that we are not having a strategy that is set for a period of time but not an active strategy that we can use. So the framework approach and the pillar approach, where each department is clearly named as having responsibility for the action, should hopefully drive that through as well.
Thank you very much, Emer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Morris, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And apologies for being late. I had to sign a passport form in the office, which is an hour and a quarter away. So apologies to all my members here as well. Thanks for your presentation. You said a work had already been done on the strategy before the Minister came into place. So what's the time frame that has been spent on this strategy, and how soon will it be implemented? And will the strategy be revisited to look at the strengths and the weaknesses, and will the strategy be able to be a living document that can be tweaked every so often, depending on how the executive decides, and update it and amend it to suit where we are at that particular time?
Absolutely, and this is where we are investing a lot of resource and time in making sure we have a model that will allow us to do that. Minister came into office in February. This was a commitment and a priority for him from that period. We have a large amount of evidence and work from the co-design and expert advisory panel to build from and work through, and we have taken that forward. We've had the PAC recommendations, which have been very helpful in forming our governance piece around the strategy. We've engaged very closely with all the departments now, and we are seeking their ministers' content and the executive buy-in to the overall process. We have the programme for government, which has adopted the wellbeing framework, which has been out for public consultation, which aligns with the pillar approach we're taking to the strategy. So we are looking at all the levers available to us to make sure the strategy is agile, it's responsive to the needs of people now, that the prioritisation as we go through the various pillars, we can look at through that lens, but we need the executive to be content that this strategy will work in that way. But it has to work in this way because it is so wide-ranging, and we are relying on departments to do their role and deliver the actions they need to deliver.
I see where you're coming from. I'm quite happy with that response. My problem is that going forward, is it future-proofed that it can be tweaked, considering it's a cross-department document? Can it be tweaked and altered as need be if we find that some part of it's not working as well as envisaged, and it could work better, or there's maybe other things that could be added in? Is it future-proofed?
So that's where we need to make sure our monitoring and reporting arrangements are correct, and that the executive will take, it's their strategy, so they will have that influence through this.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Morris. Brian, go ahead,
Okay.
please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I welcome what I'm hearing there about a focus on tackling the root causes of poverty, and I think you mentioned 3 work streams: minimising the risk of falling into poverty, mitigating the effects of poverty, and working with people to exit poverty. It sounds like a sound structure. In terms of employability support, we've received correspondence today in our pack about the ongoing uncertainty about the shared prosperity funding for 18 groups providing that employability support, and uncertainty now about the future of the Disability Employment Support Scheme, an EQAA on the future of that. I mean, the Minister's previously spoken about the importance of employability or employment as a route out of poverty, and I acknowledge it's not the only solution, but it is an important part. Will that employability support be a priority in the strategy, or is that something that you're hearing?
So we are working obviously very closely with colleagues in Department for Economy as well, and the actions that will eventually make it into the strategy will have to be agreed by the executive. But absolutely, we recognise the role of work in lifting people out of poverty as an exit to poverty. So while we can't, in the Department for Communities, I can't give you a commitment today around, where that employability, but we would be expecting that that would be in the first pillar of the strategy around employability in its broadest terms, But the executive would need to be content and agree that.
Although employability support, I think, is a responsibility of the Department for
So I was
Communities.
just gonna say,
Yes,
it
it's
We're
not-
also
is.
working closely, obviously, with colleagues within DFC right across the gamut of, as you say, employability support on the jobs and benefits side. So, in addition to the work we're doing with other departments, we're working very closely with colleagues within DFC as well. So, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's in the mix.
and I've visited my local jobs and benefits office and spoken to staff there, and they do important work. But I would also speak up for the value of in the volunteering community sector and the added reach that they have, and I know they work with the colleagues in the jobs and benefits office. But I would speak for the benefit of the voluntary community sector in this type of work, because I think they do have an added reach of working with people.
And there is obviously that close relationship with the Department for Communities as well. And we met colleagues just earlier this week just to discuss their kind of input to the strategy going forward as well. So, yeah, I'm absolutely aware of that.
But I would hope the department, as we are doing, will keep inquiring with the Westminster Department about the future of that shared prosperity funding. Concerned that there's been a 40% reduction, and we're seeking updates on those 18 projects, and funding for them. My other question, Chair, is just relating to that. It's important in anti-poverty work that resources and programs are targeted, at those most experiencing poverty, and working with them to help them work their way out of poverty, and so that as we're measuring, I presume there will be ongoing measures of the impact of all of the strategy and all the various funding program, but it's important that it's also targeted and that resources are not misdirected in a way that does not actually address poverty levels and help the people in most need of that support. Will that be a focus of the strategy?
We're working very closely with colleagues in NISRA and others across other jurisdictions just to see what the key indicators are, and if there's gaps in our current work, to keep that under review. The work that we've done in the literature review has been really, really helpful in identifying those key blocks, as it were, that we need to get an indicator on to measure. I suppose then it's back to that impact point. Are the actions that are under each strategic pillar delivering what they need to do, and having that cumulative overview through the governance arrangements to ensure that if one piece isn't working, why is it not working, and are we missing some other key element?
And that is interesting and intriguing, I suppose, in a way, in the lack of any further information. But can you give us an example of how that literature review has led to an outcome, or led to a governance point?
So I suppose it ties back into the overarching wellbeing framework that underpins the programme for government that's been out for recent public consultation. So across the various domains in that wellbeing framework, there's a number of indicators, but you would have relative and absolute poverty, for example, as a very simple example, as a key indicator under some of those domains, but not necessarily within the Department for Communities, for example. So under the Department of Health and wider wellbeing issues, poverty is playing a role and will be an indicator as to how we're lifting people out into a better wellbeing, life satisfaction perspective. So that work is still ongoing. As I say, the public consultation is just finished. It will be for the executive to determine how they want to use that wellbeing framework. But we're very keen that we align with our colleagues in NISRA and that we speak across all departments as to the indicators and statistics that we're using.
Just to say as well, I suppose one of the things that came out to me from the review was the power of helping people into employment and helping people into work as a key kind of ladder out of poverty. So again, just as an example, that's the kind of thing that came through really strongly from the research. The people that can work and can be helped, supported into work, and again, that's become one of the pillars in terms of helping people out of poverty.
And what would that mean, Carol, then, in relation to the strategy? How has that changed or informed the strategy?
That then one of the key pillars then is helping people help themselves out of poverty. So again, that's helped shape that broader framework with the three pillars. So you can see the clear run through from the research then to a key area of interest, and then you'll have all your strategic actions below that and a support and action plan.
Yeah. And I presume that will tie in with work, say, for example, in the Department for Economy around good jobs, around support for carers, and we have touched many times on this, on the inadequacy of carers allowance and how that prevents people from undertaking not only work but actually training and reskilling opportunities.
Absolutely, and as I say, that's, you know, we've had already conversations individually, you know, one-to-ones with those departments, and then the broader, you know, to make those sort of linkages and see where they can contribute to the various pillars. So absolutely.
Okay, Brian, okay for now. I'll go to our Deputy Chair then, Ciara.
I have 4 questions, so I'll just take them individually. I suppose the first one, I'll go with the ongoing statistical work that you have done. Could you clarify for me regarding the multiple deprivation measures, are they still going to be a key measurement moving forward regarding the strategy?
So the multiple deprivation measures and objective need, which is the requirement under the Northern Ireland Act, the 2011 requirement to base the strategy on objective need. Yes, we'll be working with NISRA around that. So what we're trying to do is use existing data, make sure that there's no gaps in that data to drive the indicators that we need to monitor our I suppose, outcomes and our benefits from this. So yes, we're working very closely with colleagues as well within the department who are doing the people in place review and the wider work across DFC in respect of that as well. But our key source of data is be driven from NISRA.
But is the key source of data going to be multiple deprivation measures, or are there additional measures going to be added to that, or are you completely revamping the statistical approach? We're well aware of multiple deprivation measures since 2016. We had the Nobel prior to that. I've worked through them. We have at least 10 different domains that work across the north that can go down to super output level, down to output level. They haven't been updated, and I have asked through the Department of Finance and NISRA when they're going to update them. There is uncertainty out there as to what statistical approach, because you obviously need a baseline and we need a good baseline moving forward. Have you agreed the baseline to move forward? The statistical baseline that you're utilising across the north with regards to poverty, and I'm conscious poverty cuts across education, housing, welfare, etc. But I'd really love to know what statistical evidence you're using to create a baseline, or maybe it's not agreed yet, or can you throw any more detail on that? Or
there'll be a range of indicators, multiple deprivation, and the way those figures are calculated, part of them. But there'll also be individual deprivation measures. There'll be measures around absolute and relative poverty before and after housing costs. And we're working with NISRA colleagues actually to look at the best way to measure those things. Again, keeping it aligned with the wellbeing framework, because we don't want to create, you know, a whole industry out of measuring these things. It actually becomes a bureaucratic problem. So we are focusing on those things, and to a certain extent we're working with the NISRA colleagues now. The literature review, I mean, you'd asked there about the literature review and how it informed you know, the way we'd be looking at this, and part of that is we'll be looking at measures that fit within the 3 pillars of the strategy. So the risk of falling into poverty, the impact that poverty has on people's lives, and actually the levels of people in poverty, and also then we'll be working with people, with our colleagues within the Department for the Economy, looking at how we actually help people exit poverty. So there will be a range of measures. Many of them pre-exist, and as Emer said, we'll identify if there will be further areas. But the multiple deprivation measures, those will focus on sort of area-based poverty, which is one aspect of it, but there's also measures around individual poverty, and also we may be looking at measures around things like, you know, education and health outcomes, where we know that those impact on people's risk of falling into poverty, and also their ability to exit poverty.
so the jury's out as to the complex. It's complex, and I understand it. There's a range of statistical evidence. The core multiple deprivation measure is the one that everyone used across the sector with regards to identifying where poverty is concentrated and across the domains where it should be, where the resources need to go across health, education, housing stuff. So that's going to still be core, but given the complexity of it, there will be additional statistics used to address some of the needs, new needs that have been identified, particularly at a personalised level. Right.
I think that's it. I mean, the multiple deprivation measures very much focus on, as you say, it's area-based deprivation, but I mean, as we all know, there are people within areas that aren't technically suffering from poverty, but who are personally in poverty. So we need to make sure that the measures cover those things as well. So some of the poverty statistics, particularly the relative and absolute poverty statistics, that gives us a clear measure of how many people are actually in socioeconomic deprivation. So that will be sort of one of the key statistics. And if you actually look at the statistics that are reported annually, have been previously and will continue to be reported on in the poverty bulletin, that will actually form a lot of the kind of core of the reporting of it. It'll continue.
That's great, thank you. Second.
Chair, just if I can come in on a related point there, just as a previous social worker, I have to say I kind of worry about the ability of, for example, and I know that there was an anti-poverty framework brought out for social work in the light of so many vacancies within the social work workforce. You know, I think to me that's a key area where, for example, the Department of Health need to say, how are we going to deliver on this anti-poverty agenda if we don't address those vacancies of people who are very well equipped, in my opinion, to both in terms of mitigating poverty strand, but also the exiting poverty and pathways to that. So I just want to make that comment.
No,
Chair. Sorry
okay.
about that.
Just second question, can you throw any light on, and I do really like the 3 pillars because that keeps you really focused and concentrated. Can you throw any light on the programme areas within the 3 columns?
So that's the conversation we're having at the moment with the various departments. Probably speaking for the Department for Communities, we obviously have our fuel poverty strategy. We are working with colleagues in DWP. We'll have the recommendations of the UK-wide child poverty task force coming forward in due course as well. So we are focusing on those actions. I suppose the short, medium and long term to bring another 3 lenses into the matrix. But what do we need to do now, and what do we need to do in the sustainable journey out of the poverty strategy? So we don't want to have just a series of actions that is almost business as usual and we tick boxes on this. So that's where we're working across our own department and the other departments to make sure that the programmes they're putting in place are costed and will be affordable under that department. We want a level of ambition in the longer term, but we also need something that's practical and pragmatic as well.
Okay.
So, and apologies, I don't have the detail.
No, that's fine.
From the other departments at this stage.
Just question 3, and I'll declare an interest in the sense that I did manage a number of neighbourhood renewal projects over the years, just in relation to the neighbourhood renewal programme, the areas at risk programme, the small pockets of deprivation programme. We're well aware of the huge cuts on an annual basis throughout that programme, where it used to be, particularly neighbourhood renewal, we had 25-26 million when I originally started. I think it's currently sitting around 17-18 million, so there's been cuts religiously, and I know you have the people in place ongoing review of that, but obviously that won't complete prior to the anti-poverty strategy. So within the strategy moving forward, where does programmes, apps sit? Because they're key when it comes to, as we mentioned, regarding statistics and drilling down into those neighbourhoods and communities where quite clearly across a range of domains are ranking well up there regarding child poverty, health deprivation, access to services, all that type of stuff. So where does those programmes sit?
We sit very closely together. So look, the anti-poverty strategy, the framework, our Minister is committed, and that will be coming to the Executive in January and going forward. That does not mean to say that is then a standalone strategy that doesn't speak to the other work that's going on in the department. So, for example, our fuel poverty strategy will be coming in advance of our anti-poverty strategy and structures, people in place potentially a little behind. But it's to the wider point, we are not setting in stone this absolute structure with programmes. As we need to flex and bring those others in, we will, and learn the lessons. But I want to give an assurance to the committee, we are not working within silos in the department. We are very closely aligned with our colleagues and across all of these areas. To the earlier point around funding as well and pulling of resources, the test and learn collaboration pilots that have come out of the People in Place review as well. We're building that into our work too, and we're working very closely with colleagues in the community and voluntary sector and the infrastructure support there. So we, as a department, are focused on this strategy, and we're pulling all different parts of that together. So I just want to give you that assurance that we're not step changing as we go. We are building a strategy that's a framework that will have actions that are deliverable and pragmatic, and that we can update as we go along or remove actions that aren't working.
Just a final one for me, just relation under them programmes, and I have to say how critically important they are, and the amazing work that they have done in our neighbourhoods and communities over the years. So on that, and this is a personal opinion under neighbourhood renewal, where we didn't have the other departments, although that was to be a cross-cutting programme moving forward, coming forward with, particularly as we say, finance funding to drive forward and tackle deprivation once for all in our neighbourhood. So I would like to ask, just from yourselves, just from the ongoing review that has been done over the past year on the expert panel, the PAC report, the programme for government, but all of you, what's been the lessons learnt now to ensure moving forward? Because I think we all are really, really keen and delighted now that we're at the final stage of delivering on anti-poverty strategy. What's been the lessons learnt that we can ensure? I know Kelly kind of highlighted a wee bit in bringing a cross-cutting, cross-departmental approach to the anti-poverty strategy. We know it's basically the most critical, in my opinion, strategy going forward across all departments to try and ensure we end poverty for good. That's where we want to be. So it's just, what's been the lessons learned, and is there any new nuances in regard to how we can drive this anti-poverty strategy forward that is going to once and for all deliver?
So, and probably a personal, maybe just, from my background, I was very keen coming into the department to have an opportunity to work on the anti-poverty strategy, because I too understand it to be an overarching strategy that can drive delivery and change. The lessons that I've learned: ownership, accountability for those who are charged with the actions. So this department leads on the anti-poverty strategy, and we will not be found wanting in that role. But underneath that, the departments, and if the point's already been made around reprioritising anti-poverty actions in line with budgets, where's the commitment? And that's where the really, really important, to my mind, part of this is the executive agreement to a governance structure that allows actions to be taken. So that allows the strategy to manoeuvre, to be agile, to respond as it needs to, as a strategy should, over the period. It's been very, very helpful, the PAC report on child poverty, which was on paper an agreed strategy that everyone was signed up to, did deliver on a lot of actions, but what was the impact of the actions? What did it actually deliver? And I don't want to sit here today and say this is an easy task. Yeah. It's very, very challenging, and I'm very lucky I have colleagues here who understand and have been engaged, and the sector that's so supportive and willing to give advice and help the department as we shape this. And I would hope that if we don't get it 100% right at the start, that at least we know then how to develop and change it, and that we're able to take those decisions and challenge each other as we go through the system to get it right, because it's too important not to be a strategy that delivers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go to Kelly. Well, actually, I'll go to Andy first, if I may, Kelly.
Thanks, Chair. I've just a couple of quick questions. Unfortunately, I have to go. Just in terms of, and apologies if this is already out there, can you tell me what is the time frame for this strategy in terms of how long is it going to run? Is it going to be a 5-year or 10-year strategy?
I think
the consensus during co-design was we originally set a task to develop a 5-year strategy, but I think the intention was then, again, and all of this is subject to executive approval, that it would be a 10-year strategy. Okay. To be honest, I mean, we talked earlier about some of the impacts of this. Some of the impacts in terms of actually tackling poverty are very, very long term. There's some short, there's some medium. So really, you have to be looking beyond the 5, even beyond the 10 years, to be honest. But again, it's that idea that we keep this agile, and that we can respond to changing circumstances and events over the course of that period.
Yeah, no, totally, and I get that. Whilst it obviously is time bound in that document, it will be a live and reactive document. But I suppose then that obviously leading into the next question in terms of the department's view, and I appreciate it's cross-departmental, but speaking to the households out there affected by poverty, because those are the people that we need to reach and affect most, what are the key headline themes the department are going to be looking at? So, for example, if I look at some of the stakeholder engagement, the community and voluntary sector, some of the proposals they had put forward in terms of outcomes was the eradication, work towards the eradication of poverty by 2040. So can you maybe give us a flavour favour of that. What are the key headlines that we're going to take away from this? What are people going to see, and what is the impact going to be on them?
It goes back to the 3 pillars idea. Again, I think that was, it allows you to kind of set in an understandable way, the kind of, the framework for what the strategy is setting out to do. So those ideas of mitigating the impact of poverty, which speaks to a lot of what you mentioned there, minimising the risk or eliminating as far as possible the risk of people falling into poverty, and then those that are in poverty helping them to help themselves out, or helping them out of poverty. So those are the 3 kind of headline impacts, if you will, and then everything else sort of flows beneath that.
So there'll be the in terms of the measurements within the strategy, they'll be very clear, easily understood and easily measured, because quite often, and I must say, look, there is fantastic work being done across departments, and sometimes criticism is unfair, but equally there are times where the criticism is right, it is correct, such as the PAC report. And I suppose, will there be any model of independent evaluation built into the ongoing period to independently review? Because quite often, I'm sure committee colleagues can speak for themselves, but we find ourselves agreeing to disagree in the departments and different departments' assessments of what they've achieved. So is there going to be any type of independent evaluation on an ongoing basis to actually critically assess the outcomes of the strategy?
So that is something that I know PAC recommended, and something that we need to look at as part of the governance arrangements. So I can't give you the Minister's view on that.
Yep. But equally, I keep hearing we need to look at, but this strategy is going to be going to the executive in January. Should this not be something that's already looked at, already taken forward, and already factored in?
So work is ongoing, and we are in detail. The Minister hasn't signed off on it, so I can't, as an official today, say that is happening. And the form of the independent evaluation, where that would sit, who would do that, is something we would need to look at.
Okay, and then just finally, Chair, my last question. In terms of those 3 pillars, are there any ideas of worldwide best practice you'd give as an insight into that the department's looked at, where they've been effective in actually tackling poverty? Is there anything the department's looked at, they've seen it's worked well, and we're looking to implement here?
Well, we have spoken to colleagues across jurisdictions, or UK jurisdictions in Ireland, and we're continuing to have those conversations. And we speak to those colleagues quite regularly, as well as which we're engaging with the Four Nations Child Poverty Group, which has been set up by the UK.
Is there any particular outputs that you've looked at and you've said that's worked really, really well in this jurisdiction, we should be looking to do that here?
There would be, there wouldn't be anything necessarily very specific or any kind of, I don't think there's going to be a silver bullet in terms of solving this issue. I think it's the kind of areas that we've talked about. It's across those 3 pillars, and it's about looking to ensure that people have the right levels of education, the right levels of training support. A lot of the issues that people have raised here today, it's doing all those things. It's making sure that people have the right health support, if health's limiting them in their ability to get into work. So we're actually looking at all the things, and we're doing many of the things, and most of the other countries you find are taking action in those kind of areas. It's a question of, are there ways we can do it better, or do more of it, or do more of a targeted approach to help and support people?
Thank you, and I appreciate your work on this, and I look forward to reading it when we finally get a copy of it. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Andy. Kelly?
And actually, just my next question leads on from Andy's governance queries. One of the things that we do have as a tool across all government departments is the Section 75 inequality monitoring. However, it's used to say that we are not discriminated against. Do you think that it's time then, given the work that you're doing on this, in order to get that cross-departmental commitment and, to be honest, bring forward innovation to see what we can do to improve people's situations so they don't fall into poverty, or we can raise them out of it, that we actually use the Section 75 across government in a different way? It's supposed to talk about all equality of opportunity. Instead of having an impact assessment that says we're not discriminating against someone, if we flipped that round and said these are the positive actions that this department has taken to include, improve, with regards to the anti-poverty strategy, that governance, to be honest, is something that the community and voluntary sector, the women's sector, have been calling for years. It's going back to the actual intention originally of Section 75, which was not about just preventing discrimination, it was about equality of opportunity. And if we changed that across all of government, then part of the work of the strategy is being done, because it actually forces departments to have to bring forward and report on the innovations that they're doing to address strategies. Is there anything like that? I know it's quite a big thing for the department to propose for all other departments, but given the fact that this strategy is aimed over 10 years, it will take time to embed in a change to the process, which is actually permitted under the 1998 Act. So is there anything like that type of governance change that could be brought forward to bring forward innovation?
To be honest, if an EQA and the equality process is done properly, it should. It's not.
I know.
It shouldn't just be about there's no discrimination there for box tick. Yeah. Forget about it. If it's done properly, it should identify differential impact across the groups. So, in saying that, I accept, because we also have the equality unit within the Department for Community as well, so we do see most of the screenings, and so we know it's not always done very well. Yeah. I think there is an opportunity to maybe do that better, and we will be doing a full EQA on this. Yeah. And we will be doing that in the proper way to identify impacts, to identify positive impact as well as negative, and to use the tools that we have in the legislation properly. So that I wouldn't argue with it, that there isn't an opportunity to do this better. Whether we do that by setting an example, I don't know. But I couldn't talk to whether there's a root and branch change needed. But as I say, if we do what we have the way it's intended to be used, it should go some way to.
It's just if there was a proactive action within the strategy to require everyone to actually report on what opportunity for equity has been taken, to raise up those most vulnerable. Because the prevention of poverty across departments, you think about all the nuances. If they're actually having to report and say, do you know what, we actually did improve mental health because we did this, and this enables a person to be able to go to work within health, or it could be education. If we had that positive action as part of the strategy, and that's cross-departmental, it could move it on a stage, because I think we're very protective at the moment. We're not discriminating, therefore we're not liable, when actually what we should be doing, if we're looking at a progressive strategy such as the anti-poverty strategy and the others, we need to be actually taking innovative, proactive measures in order to meet the Strand 3 proposals that you guys have. So I just wonder if the governments can be that progressive, to sort of say to the executive, look, we've got an opportunity here to use one of the tools that we have, the way it was intended, to actually meet our objectives in this strategy.
I wouldn't say no. As I say, day and daily, whenever we see screenings come in, or EQAs, or even policy and development, and we're constantly saying build in equality considerations right at the start and do this properly, because it'll actually make it easier for you in the long run, and it helps you. It's the best practice in terms of developing policy. So I wouldn't argue with that. As I say, day and daily, that's the message we're trying to get out across our department, and I know other departments are doing it too. Yes, there's potential there. Yeah. But as I say, the equality considerations and the screening and the impact assessment has been built in from the start.
Yeah. I just think the impact assessment questions that are reported on or used are not good. I think it needs
maybe
to be
not
flipped.
the best tool, but it's as good as we have. But as I say, if it's used properly, there's the potential there for it to be a much stronger.
Just think on the governance of the anti-poverty strategy, it would be good if we had an agreement by the executive that, in order to be transparent and show the sustainable solutions that are being brought forward, is that there is a mechanism that we can actually prove what other departments are doing to contribute to anti-poverty. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
I've just one final question, but I would reiterate with Kelly, and it might be quite innovative. We did have the Equality Commission presenting, and they made it quite clear that departments weren't utilising the resources and skills and expertise they have. And I do agree, someone who has done equality impact assessments in my time, we need to be looking more at equality of opportunity rather than trying to mitigate against actions of inaction. So I would just like to ask, as it would be in your intent to maybe meet up with the Equality Commission prior to, or have you done a lot of work already?
We, as I say, are in constant contact with the Commission, and we did have the Commission in to speak to senior management just about the importance of, we're constantly trying to push that across the department, so we'll have a good relationship with them. I know they can be critical as well, and that's fine, that's their role, but we do have a good working relationship in terms of sharing resources and advice and inviting them in to sort of speak to senior staff and staff that are on the ground to, as I say,
But it's just to confirm for Ciara, it's not about talking about equality, it's actually changing the process in this strategy to say it's no longer acceptable, guys, just to put an equality impact assessment in that says what you're not discriminating. You actually have to tell us what you have done on an equity level to help to raise up people to achieve our anti-poverty strategy. It's that fundamental flip of Section 75 that would be a game changer, I think.
Would be. I think it'll be a game changer too. Just was my final question was, sorry, it was just a quick one. It's a massive task that you have, and I really, really do appreciate it. But it's so critically important, so I appreciate all the work that you have put in. It mightn't feel like that with all these questions, but we really, really do, because we're all so embedded and looking forward to receiving it and working through it in the time ahead. And I know you have Christmas as well, you do all need a Christmas break. When is it due to be on the Minister's table?
So we're required January.
Yeah, right.
Okay, well, I suppose I share what I think is maybe a bit of a general concern. We've heard a lot of very good stuff, a lot of interesting stuff. We would like to hear more details, and that's clearly something that we look. But we've also heard of a lot of ongoing work, which makes me think there's still, and I'm a bit concerned around that, particularly with all of those other departments. So can you assure us that it is on track in that sense, and that detail and that work is coming forward now at pace?
So our process is continuing as we had envisaged. The role of our department, we're doing everything in line with our timelines, what we need to do. I can't speak for other departments, but we have had very strong engagement at official level. It's the ministerial clearance piece that we'll be at now, to be open. Once that comes through, we are ready to put it into the draft, as it were. So I don't want to give a sense that we are sitting with blank pages in front of us here. We are absolutely not. But it's the approvals piece that we'll be going through as officials.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Is there any deadline for the other ministers to be signing off with yourselves?
So
do they have a deadline?
They do.
And is it passed? Can I ask, is the deadline passed?
No, as I say, we had the engagement on the 18th, as I say, with the other departments, and then we've agreed then that we'll sort of write and get official commissions and get their commission back before the end of the year, before the Christmas break is our intention.
Before the Christmas break?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And this is, I suppose, a final one for me. And just to say, in general, we do look forward to engage. We are extremely invested in this, and we see this as being so key to everything. So we welcome today's session, and we look forward to some more of that more detailed, granular information coming forward at the earliest possible stage. You've mentioned the co-design group. You've said that what you're doing has been informed by them. The committee has several times stated that we would urge you to engage with them and allow them to have insight and input into this final iteration of the document. And I would reiterate that today. But I would also ask, what ongoing plans will there be to ensure there's effective engagement with the community and voluntary sector throughout the life of the strategy? Because you have talked there about it being reactive and able to. How will that be built in? And I mean built in rather than just indicated. How will that be hardwired into the ongoing implementation?
So again, part of that governance model where we will have the monitoring and that engagement with all partners across the piece. Just on the co-design group, Minister gave a commitment when he was here at committee that he would engage before the formal consultation process once we have that in place. So yes, the structure that we develop, we would expect to see our key stakeholders' views referenced in that. And I can bring that detail when we've...
And how then will that be, rather than that being an event, that becomes part of the process of monitoring and tweaking and ensuring that it's fit for purpose at all stages? How will that be sort of inculcated into the strategy?
So at the moment, I suppose through Learning from the Child Poverty, again, where an annual report was published out, and that was it really, and there wasn't a call for comment or views. As a bare minimum, at least an annual report would be open to that public scrutiny and see where we're going and the indicators and where they're sitting. the formal structure of that we would need to give consideration to if we were setting up a separate group. But it's something that I'll take away from this morning's session and think about.
Okay, well listen, I think on behalf of the committee we want to wish you all success and all haste with we really see it, and there's some, I suppose, tantalising glimpses there around the work that's ongoing, but we do want to see more colour, and we certainly don't want to see any delay. Melissa, I noticed you just indicating there, if you very briefly please.
That's okay, Colin, carry on.
Alright. So I would wish you well in that work. It is crucial work. It has been ongoing for some time, so in that context we really do hope to see that detail quite soon. But for now, Emer, Paul and Carol, I'd like to thank you for a briefing committee and look forward to meeting with you again soon. Okay? All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, members, so we're moving on then to our yes, so just to check before we go on to our next session, members, is there any follow-up action that members want to draw out from that session, or Kelly?
Could I ask if we could ask the department what is the form that civil servants are asked to use when doing their equality screening? Because I would just like to see the questions that they have to answer as part of that process, because I think it is based solely on preventing discrimination as opposed to that equality of opportunity, because the work that's being done there, to be honest, is quite impressive, and if that's able to happen on a cross-departmental basis, it would be a game changer, but only if all other departments come with it. So it would be interesting to see what our own Department for Communities has by way of the Equality Impact Assessment process of what they have to report on. I imagine that there's a form or an online template or something that they have to use. If we could see that, because this committee could advise the Minister that we would like to see a flip on that, because by requiring everybody else to show what they're doing innovatively to address anti-poverty, it could be a change.
Yeah.
I would concur. Secondly, I just think they've mentioned they're waiting all the other departments to come back. So that's just a wee bit concern for me, because it is quite difficult. There's still a lot of final work that needs to be done by the department officials. So is it something that we could write to all the other departments, re-emphasise the critical importance of getting back to the department officials? I don't know. Is that appropriate for us to do that? Because I'm conscious of, we've only 3 weeks left. We've got Christmas, second week in January. Even to get it on the Minister's desk by then, I just have a feeling that it's just insurmountable pieces of work that the department officials have to do. And if they're going to be delayed in any way by other departments not signing off on their commitments to this, you know, we won't see the end of January, we won't see. And there is an expectation now, and I know the Minister has confirmed on the Assembly floor, it's his expectation to get it out there, so that by the end of January, we're all waiting for that. So I feel if there's a way us as a committee could just raise it with, write a letter to all the other departments to say how critical that is, and are they on track to report back to the Department for Communities before the the Christmas recess.
Yeah, I certainly would. I certainly be in agreement with that. I also think we should seek a further update and review towards the end of January to ensure that this is remaining on track, and to get some of that further detail which may be available at that stage. So I think we should look at scheduling in to our forward work programme a further update to make sure that we're keeping eyes on the development of this and the progress, and holding to account in that sense of targets and urgency. If members are content.
Chair, just to as I'd asked Emer, given the fact that we have the housing supply strategy and none of the committee has breached the embargo on that, to be honest, we respect that from the Minister. But given the fact that that has happened, that we were given the strategy in advance, well, I think probably at the same time it was sent to the Executive Office, is there an opportunity for that same copy of the anti-poverty strategy could be provided to ourselves, obviously under embargo? Absolutely respect that time that the executive needs to take and make their decisions, but it would be very useful, because I found that having the housing supply strategy in advance has been very helpful, and it would be very useful, I think, for the committee to have sight of that and you know, even if we do have questions, maybe we could ask officials in a closed session, but we would respect the embargo. So maybe we could write to the Minister and say, given the fact that there's a precedence has been set with the housing supply strategy, if he may consider to provide that to the committee, obviously under strict embargo conditions.
Okay, and as much information as open as possible in general, but should that be required, I suppose, would be, but I certainly have no issue with as suggested there. Anything else, ma'am, Clerk?
So can I just check, committee has agreed we will write to all departments seeking that they expedite their inputs? Yeah, that's one. We'll seek a further update at the end of January, just from those officials, put that in our forward work programme. And then to the Minister, seeking an embargo copy. And information on the EQI template or form that's being used.
Yes, please. That would be really helpful.
Everything.
Yep. Okay, members content? Okay, thank you. So then we will move on then, members, to agenda item 8, which is a briefing then from the Commissioner for Older People. So the briefing paper is contained for members there at page 396 of your pack. And I would now like to welcome the following representatives from the Older Persons Commission to our meeting. So first of all, to welcome Eddie Lynch, who is the Commissioner for Older People, and I hope I've the it's Angel, is that the correct pronunciation? Angel.
Yes.
Yep.
Very good.
Okay. And yep. So who is the Policy and Research Officer. So welcome both, and Eddie, I'll go back to you to make a brief opening statement, please, and then we'll move to questions from members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the committee for the invitation to be here one last time. I've submitted a report to the committee, so I'm assuming I don't need to go through all of that, but I suppose just in terms of this briefing today, it was more just a summary of the issues that have come up during my term, and I suppose one of the things that I was asked to do was, looking ahead, for the next Commissioner and what would be the big issues. I think it's important for me to say, firstly, that I don't have any role in deciding what the next Commissioner's priorities would be, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to do that. That'll be totally within the powers of the next Commissioner. But I suppose what I will just maybe flag, Chair, a few just issues that I would just like to put on record. Probably the number one issue is the need for the Assembly to prioritise the ageing population in Northern Ireland. That's something I've been very passionate about for many years now. I feel that we still haven't got it up the political agenda to the level it should be, and I think given a lot of the big issues that face us as a society are very much intrinsically linked to that ageing population, and that's not just about older people, it's just a more societal change, and I think it's something that we need to be really cognizance of in terms of designing public services, transforming our services to meet that change, because it is a major change for us in society, and it's a good news story too that we're living longer. And I think one of the things that I would like to say again today would be the need to support the ageing population and to keep it active as long as possible. That's something that I feel is really critical. Most of the renowned experts on ageing around the world really are at one when it comes to the best way to support the ageing population is to keep people healthier for longer. And keep them active and independent for as long as possible. And that makes total sense, because that means people then don't rely as heavily on services, but also they can continue to contribute later in life in many ways that older people do. And that's good for the individual, but it's also good for society and for how we run our services. So I think, a big part of that will be looking, I think, at the health and social care system in general. And I think there is a need to transform it and reform it, and to meet the very changing demands that are out there as part of the ageing population. And there's new ways of doing things, like new technology offers opportunities, but there's a lot of things that older people still bring to me with the system now that they're struggling with. And one of the big issues that I've been getting, really particularly since the lockdown ended, one of the big issues is access to GP appointments. And everywhere I go, I hear older people really concerned about how hard it is to get a face-to-face GP appointment, and that the system that's in place now, the model, is actually not fit for purpose for the part of our population that relies most heavily on the health system. So I think that will be a big issue for the next commissioner to look at, and to see how that service can better meet older people's needs. The last couple of points I would just like to make in my opening statement would be around legislation, which is obviously something this Assembly has control over. We still, unfortunately, don't have age discrimination legislation in place in Northern Ireland in relation to goods, facilities and services. We remain the only part of the UK or Ireland that doesn't have that in place, and that's just unacceptable. We need to get that legislation in place to protect older people, and not just older people, people of all ages from discrimination at different points in their life. And I would just give one example of that came up during the pandemic. When I was working with other organisations, the Welsh Commissioner and other organisations across the UK, we were comparing the different approaches from different areas to the COVID pandemic. And in the early stages, we came across an ethics committee draft criteria for admissions to hospital. And we came across that one of the criteria that was being proposed was an age criteria. A couple of them were around 70 plus, and I think there was one was 65 plus, where they were suggesting that people over that age would not be admitted to hospital under any circumstances during COVID. Now, that's as serious as it gets in terms of age discrimination, but that was only stopped by the organisations writing to all the health trusts across England, Scotland, Wales, saying that was actually illegal because of the age discrimination legislation. In Northern Ireland, we didn't have that in place. So technically that could have happened here and people would have been vulnerable to that. So I think that just gives you one example of why this legislation is really vitally important, and I would like to see that brought forward as soon as possible. And the last point I would make would be the need to introduce new adult safeguarding legislation. My investigation a number of years back into Dunmurry Manor Care Home produced the Home Truths reports with many recommendations, but the number one recommendation was a new piece of strong adult safeguarding legislation, and that legislation now is really ready to go. It's the Adult Protection Bill. I've been liaising with officials on that development over the last number of years, and now I would like to see that introduced as soon as possible, because that is badly needed to protect adults in vulnerable circumstances in Northern Ireland. So I think that's something that I would like to see all the parties in the Assembly really push to get that through as soon as possible. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for that. And I know I have worked actually closely with you in my own previous role in terms of Health Committee and around the Home Truths and that Dunmurry Manor issue. And in fact, I had actually brought forward private members legislation on private members bill on adult safeguarding, and the department indicated that they were going to adopt that, which I welcomed and thought, but I like you would have hoped to have seen it sooner than this, to be quite honest. I suppose that whole issue of demographics, and I know that you have done significant work around that, is one that I think we as a establishment need to be very cognizant and really taking those steps now. One of my questions is, it's something that has just occurred recently, and I'm prompted to ask it today in relation to your talk around the age discrimination. It's come to my attention recently that an older person, it's a constituency issue, but I think it's wider than, I'm not raising it in an individual case. An older person who is in a hospital setting towards end of life and has been told that children under 16 can't visit. Now, to me, that discriminates both against the 16-year-old and also at a very crucial end of life stage for the older person, potentially discriminates against them. I cannot fathom a clinical reason as to why that would be, but I wonder, have you ever come across that type of policy, and what would your thoughts be?
Well, I haven't, Chair, and I struggle to think of what reason there would be for that. I think end of life care is a very topical issue at the minute. I think the one thing that the pandemic showed us, that how important that end of life stage is for people. That unfortunately during COVID, many people passed away without having, you know, family and friends around them. So my view would be it would only be in exceptional circumstances and some very, you know, strong clinical reason that wouldn't be allowed. If somebody's at the end stage of their life, I'm sure the vast majority of people will want to be visited by all members of their family. So I haven't come across that rule around under 16s, but it's something we could certainly go away and look at.
Yeah, okay, I appreciate that. Now, maybe we'll speak to you about that following. The other one then is just, I suppose, on a more generic one around the need to prioritise the ageing population. And I know, Angel, that work, as you say, that report that you have done. So how and what would need to be done to start to focus the Assembly and the Executive on that work?
Well, I have been very clear that I think we should have a 10th priority in the programme for government, which is about supporting our ageing population. And I just think, you know, it's a no-brainer. You know, so many of the issues that my office deal with cross over different departments. There's linkages in between health, between transport, between income, fuel poverty. And all these are big factors that impact across the board. And I suppose my point is that the ageing population, it's not just about older people, it's about recognising the demographic shift, but it's about planning in a way that sees the change that's in our society, sees where the demands are going to be, and that should be at the heart of government and the heart of government planning. And I struggle to see how that can't be one of the top issues for this Assembly, given the challenges that are out there with the health and social care system, you know, income, poverty, transport. I think these are all critical issues for addressing this issue, and I think if it's not prioritised at that high level in government, that frankly the chances of us responding to that challenge are much less. And I think we'll be sitting here in 5 years or 10 years' time in a much worse situation. So certainly my call would be, and I've spoken to the First and Deputy First Minister on this, and many other politicians and members of this Assembly, and really I would urge that make that a 10th priority for the programme for government.
And I suppose the final one for me before we go to members is in relation to a sort of a subset of that around rural and rural populations and lack of access to transport and care and lots of other things. Where do you see that issue, and is that a particular concern?
It is, and you know, if you know, it sort of ties in with my keeping people active part of this as well. If you live in a rural area, that becomes more problematic for people. So, you know, you get back into things like transport. You know, the bus pass is a lifeline for many people, but then if you're living in an area that doesn't have any buses, it's not much good. So you have to look at how do you let people still move about to connect in society, to be part of society. So it's looking at all those ways of trying to keep people active, and it can be small things. I mean, people have raised issues with me about, you know, maybe, you know, a church or a chapel stopping, you know, somebody came to me about a chapel in rural Fermanagh that was stopping morning mass and how that affected, you know, there was maybe a congregation of maybe 30 people going in the morning, mostly older people, but that was their routine. But it also got them out of the house, got them out connecting with people. And in terms of loneliness and isolation, it's things like that, small things that can make a big difference, and people losing their licence, for instance. Major issue in rural areas of older people are very fearful that if they can't drive anymore, that, you know, they're cut off from, you know, everything, you know. And I think it's those real life differences that you know make a difference. Is why I'm so passionate about things like the bus pass. One of the best things this place ever did was to introduce that, because it's not just a transport policy, it actually encourages people to get out and about, to meet friends. It's an economic booster because it encourages people to go to shops or meet up for, you know, coffee. There's so many benefits from policies like that, and it's looking at that in the round and saying, well, what is the actual impact of these policies? You know, what do people need? And it's not rocket science. People need a few pound in their pocket. They need to have connections, social connections that can make them feel more fulfilled, happier, and with that comes better health. So it's looking at things like that and looking at the real live impacts that policies have. And I think that's the thing that I want to really highlight, that I think as a society here we have to look at that and saying, what do we do to keep people active and connected, because that's the best way for people having better quality of life.
Yeah, I think that is a really interesting area and it's real important stuff. Like, and I have raised the issue of 1 hour parking, for example, in Dungannon, around how pressurised that is, and it's actually worse for older people. And also even just the availability of benches and places for, in a town like Dungannon, for example, where it's hilly or whatever, just those very simple place shaping. And just in relation to that, what is the current status of the active ageing strategy?
Well, it hasn't been very active, is probably the best way to put it. It's something that, I think definitely needs revamped. I think we do need to sort of look at that again. I don't think it's something that has been really at the focus of my mind, I have to say, over the last number of years. There's been a lot of big issues that have been separate from that. I do think that's part of the problem here, that we're not actually moving it up the agenda and making it something that all government departments should be feeding into. And I think that's often the problem here, that we need, we talk about joined up government, but we need to have joined up government if we're going to support the older population. You can't have decisions being taken by one department. For example, the proposal to take away the bus pass for 60 to 65 year olds. Now, that might have been saved money within the Department of Infrastructure, but the knock-on impact of that on people's health, people's access, childcare, volunteering, all of those things, the actual impact of policies being changed that have a negative impact crosses departments and has unseen consequences for those making those decisions. And I think that's why I feel it needs to be a cross-departmental commitment to supporting the aged population. So when decisions are being taken, you're looking at that in around and saying, well, if we make that decision here, how is this going to impact on people's health or loneliness and isolation and things like that? And these are all these are all issues that just people bring to me all the time. The value of, it's not big things, it's a value of being connected in their community, still being part of groups. Even for, a lot of you will all know, that there's loads of older people groups run by volunteers, but the impact that has on people, literally thousands of people have told me over the years, that's the highlight of my week, or that gives me comfort that I can go and speak to somebody about a problem I have or an issue and find out about where I can get help. And it's all those things that actually are real life things that we need to look at, and they're the things we need to support. And I think the knock-on benefits will be better for everyone.
Yeah, and I do think community transport sits very firmly in that as a rural rep, I have to say. And the impact, including the financial impact, not alone the social and the life impact of removing those very basic supports, is incalculable, but absolutely negative, and that's the context in which we should be looking at them.
Yeah.
So, Kelly, I have Kelly, and then I have Morris and Brian.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, is in there between Morris and Brian.
I read through your report, and when we look, this obviously is the Committee for Communities, I'm flabbergasted that the active ageing strategy finished in 2022 and we haven't got a replacement for it yet. And as you say, even within the department, we're not hearing an awful lot about the work they're doing to progress it. Anti-poverty and disability perhaps, but not the ageing one, given the fact that we know that we're heading towards a significantly older Northern Ireland. And the amount of people who will be available to work and earn tax and help to pay for our older services is incredible. But one of the things that I picked out from your report was about care home residents. So we have people living in care homes, but they're not recognised as private tenants. So as far as communities are concerned, we'll be looking at the future legislation on private tenancies and the protection that it can provide for private renters. But are we missing a trick if we leave the care home residents out of that consideration?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And we published a report on this in the last year or so, and people don't realise that the lack of security of tenure that care home residents have. We unfortunately come across this quite often in our office in terms of breakdowns of communication between a care home and a family. And it might seem like the language we can argue over the language used, but people can be evicted from their care home within 28 days, and I don't think that's because of the reason is said, we can no longer look after them properly and meet their care needs, when the reality is it's usually a breakdown in relations. but that puts the older person, in such a vulnerable position that can happen. So I think that absolutely it's a major issue that needs to be looked at. I think, it's not acceptable as a society to think that somebody is in that position where they can literally be turfed out of their home, and that's what it is. A care home is the person's home, and that they don't have that security. So I think that's something absolutely the Assembly needs to look at to see how that can be addressed and changed. They definitely need a situation, and again, like every issue here, this is going to become a bigger issue with an ageing population, and it's pretty shocking. Like I was shocked when I realised just how little rights people have, and so it's a human rights issue for me that you should be entitled to feel safe in the home that you're placed in. So that's certainly one that I've made recommendations to the Minister about, and it's one that I think needs to be taken forward.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, I know that we talk about private tenancies and private landlords. Is it a case that there's a difficulty with the fact that it's a care home as the landlord? Is that something that perhaps we need to be adding in as part of the owners of homes? There should be care homes, should be recognised. As you say, it's going to become a more prevalent issue as we have an older population.
The transactions really between the care home and the trust, and it is like a service provision, and the older person's in the middle with very little rights. So it just seems very strange that is the point. But the reality is, because we have seen it happen, we've seen people being told, you're out of here in 28 days, get yourself another home. And the research shows that actually that has a real detrimental impact on an older person's health. There's a lot of research showing that if you move somebody at that age out of a care home, that the chances are that's going to have a negative impact on their health. So it is a human rights issue for me. It's something that I think that shouldn't be tolerated, but it's something about the contract. It has to be looked at a contract level between the trusts and the care home provider. But to me, the missing piece in that discussion is the rights in that contract for the person who's central to that deal. That it can't just be seen as just a financial transaction, and then that they have no rights if the organisation decides not to care for them anymore.
You're absolutely right, given the fact that we're thinking about protecting private renters and other accommodation. If the longer notice periods are there, it gives somebody at least the option of choice of where to go.
Yeah.
But if we're allowing the care homes to give somebody 28 days to get out, or less sometimes, and especially if we have somebody who is in residential care and needs nursing care, it's very difficult, and I know that the trusts are involved. So I'm just thinking about the active ageing strategy. In the absence of it, we're not even using the 2022 one, the one that ran out. We've already seen that the programme for government doesn't include clear actions for ageing. This is something that's going to impact Northern Ireland for the next decades, but we're not seeing any positive there. I think there's a consideration that it would be an underlying key within the programme of government, expecting that departments will do something. Have you had any discussions with the Minister for Communities on how we can ensure that the programme for government, if it doesn't have the 10th piece, as you say, how the department that's responsible for active ageing is making sure that's included? Yeah, well,
I'm due to meet with the Minister actually this afternoon with the winter fuel payment issue, but I have raised this widely, but I have focused my discussions, and I met with the Executive Office on it as the ones running the consultation. But you're absolutely right. This is going to affect all of us, and it's just the ageing population is here. It's not something coming down the line. It's something that is here, and it's going to increase at a rapid rate. And unless we get to grips with it, all these stories that we hear around services, they're just going to get worse, and that's just the reality unless we start doing things differently. And I just think I think the failure of the active ageing strategy to really have any significant impact over the years has made me feel that actually we need to move this up a level, that this shouldn't just sit within one department, that this has to be central to government policy. It has to be one of the top priorities across government, because as I say, all government departments have a role to play in supporting this demographic change if we're going to get it right. So to me, that's why the focus should be on the programme for government as the main document. And I think at this stage as well, it's worth saying that there's not a lot of detail in the programme for government in terms of target setting and different things. So at this stage, I find it really disappointing that you wouldn't even get a commitment at that high level that the ageing population should be one of the top 10 priorities. You know, governments around the world recognise this as one of their biggest challenges in society. Other countries, you know, haven't adapted to this and are in worse positions than us. But that will be us in 5 or 10 years' time, and this problem will become a bigger problem to address. So it is a call to say, look, you know, you can't relegate this. You know, older people aren't a sector; they're a huge part of society. You know, so this is not one of the comments is we don't have different priorities for different groups, but older people aren't. You know, they're not a Section 75 category. They're a huge part of society here, and they cross all those different groups. And the change affects us all, you know, because it affects all our services. So, you know, if you don't get the health system right, that's not just going to affect older people. It's going to affect every age. It's going to affect younger people as well. And so that's where, to me, the programme for government is the right place for this to be. And then we can work underneath that across the departments to see which department needs to do what.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that communities does have a lot to play in that, but that's my questions finished, Eddie. I just want to say thank you for your time as the Commissioner. I know that you're soon to depart and somebody new will be stepping in, but it has been a pleasure working with you over the years, many years, because we go back a bit longer. But yeah, it's as someone who is entering older age very shortly, the work that you're doing and highlighting the issues has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Morris? No, go ahead. It's yourself, then Ciara, then Brian. That's
okay. Thanks very much for your presentation, and wherever you go, I wish you well in your future. But you talked about an ageing population. In my experience, in the health setting, the ageing population is used as an excuse to centralise acute services in and around the Greater Belfast area. Constituency-wise, Chair, with your permission, for instance, the removal of acute services from Causeway will leave the entire north coast from the hill at Lamavady right across and down through the Waterfoot without an acute hospital service. If you need acute hospital services and you're an old person, you have to travel to Antrim. So there's a lot of work to be done health-wise. One of the greatest problems, and I am an older person, not near it, I am it, is getting people active. I feel that, especially as you get older and your close family are no longer nearby, you become more and more withdrawn and you become isolated. And getting to church, getting to the post office, being able to get into the town is a wonderful way for people to engage and keep up that engagement, because quite often that's the only engagement they have for that week. So it is a problem. And you talk about care homes. One of the most difficult care home settings, I think, is dementia, because it takes a specialised care where you have people who are A, old and frail, and B, losing their mental capacity and therefore their physical capacity, and they need extra care. We do not have enough dementia specific homes in Northern Ireland anywhere. There are so many problems facing older people, it's unbelievable. Lack of exercise, lack of getting out of the house. I mean, one old guy, shouldn't call him that, but he's younger than me. He walks steady. He's been retired, and he walks steady. And I said, "Well, I like to see you're keeping yourself fit." He said, "Well, I don't look at it as keeping myself fit. I'm not going to live any longer, but I'm going to die healthy." And that was his outlook on life, a real character. No, I think there's an awful lot of work needs to be done, and an awful lot of recognition that people from all sections of the community, doesn't matter where they come from, when they get older, they become isolated, they become forgotten about, and they become easily vulnerable to scammers, to hooks, people knocking the doors and offering all sorts of things. It's a real big problem, and I appreciate the work that you've done so far. But there's an awful lot of work to do, whoever your successor may be. Yeah. He has a very busy portfolio ahead of him. So I just wonder, what do you think going forward? And I know you're stepping out and you don't want to put any parameters down for someone coming behind you, but what do you think are the main problems facing Northern Ireland as regards older people and lack of medical services amongst other services?
Well, how long do you have? We literally
chair 5 minutes.
We literally. I mean, we literally could
Not
be
long
here.
enough.
No, unfortunately, like all the issues that I've obviously raised in the report, all the issues that come to my office are all really big issues, and the health service is one, but it is wider than that. I mean, your example of the gentleman out walking is an interesting one, because there's research that shows actually the biggest impact on your health and the chances of living longer, but living longer healthier is a big thing. The biggest impact on that is a positive attitude to aging. So I was at a conference in Glasgow a couple of years back, a global conference, and these stats were being put out there. But that was the one that really stuck in my head. That said the average impact on a life expectancy is for somebody with a positive mindset to aging compared to a negative is 7 years, which really blew my mind. Thinking, wow, that's you talk about all the medical things you can do, your diet, your exercise, but that mental positive attitude to aging, and I've seen that. I would totally agree with that because I've worked now for 16, 17 years in this sector, and the older people that I've come across, when I look back on how many of them are still going strong now than they were back then, it's incredible. And it's because I feel is because they have kept themselves active and engaged. They're interested in campaigning, they're interested in being involved, they're out of the house a few days a week, they're involved in different groups and committees. And I think that, the people I know, and when I look at the health of those people who have gone from maybe late 60s, 70s when I know them, that are now well into their 80s, some are still doing the 5k park run at 84. I have a good friend who's still doing that. And it's a positive attitude to life. It's basically saying, I'm going to enjoy my later years, I'm going to keep giving myself the best chance of remaining healthy. I mean, that's always out of our control. But if you take a positive attitude to that, that will make a big difference. And I actually think, there's a lot of negatives around, older people and the problems they face, and of course that is true. But there's actually a lot of positives out there too. There's a lot of people now that are living healthier for longer. And when I look at my own parents' generation, and I see, my mum who's in her mid-70s, her group of friends, they've a better social life than I have. They're out and about, they're going to, plays or whatever, meeting for coffee down in the hotel once a week, and they're, looking after grandchildren, all of those things, but they're actually really enjoying life. And I think, but that's the good thing, that is actually, the evidence is there to say, if you're in that position, then you will more than likely live a healthier life. Where that was also shown was COVID, because one of the real tragedies of COVID is a lot of people who were very active before it didn't come back out after it. And most of the groups that I would have visited over the last couple of years since the end of lockdowns and that would all tell me that there's a lot of people who never engaged again after. And it wasn't because their health was particularly bad, but they just kind of got out of the habit of coming out. They still had a fear of COVID, but there was a sort of thing about they just got out of the habit of getting out and socialising and stuff. And that's a real concern, because once that starts happening, as you say, people do go backwards. If once you stop socialising, once you have less social contact, whether it's in church or the local shops, the evidence is there. People's mental and physical health deteriorates, and that's exactly what we need to be trying to support in the community. And it's back to that whole thing about active aging. It really is that simple. And like one of the speakers at that global conference made it really clear. It was try to have fun. He was going, try to have fun in later life, try to enjoy your life. If that's the message we get out there to people, to say, look, you may be older, but you still have a lot of options to live a really good, fulfilled life. And if we get more people in that mindset and support them by having the transport to get to wherever they want to get to, that they have a few pound in their pocket that they can meet up and go for a cup of tea or coffee, they're the sorts of things that will actually lead to massive improvements in us and savings for our health system. To be frank about it, this is going to be good for government. It's good for individuals, but it'd be a massive benefit for government. If we have a healthier population, then the pressure on our health service will reduce, and we'll be in a much better state of affairs. So, but you're absolutely right. One of the big issues as well, scams is a big issue. We have worked on the Scamwise partnership. I have to say that's been a great success. When I started, it was a fledgling. There was about 15 organisations involved in it now. There's dozens of other organisations have come on board, and that's been really successful in getting words out and warning people about scams. But unfortunately, I'm sure you all have heard people in your constituencies who have been the victims of scams, and that can be absolutely devastating for people. So it's an ongoing piece of work as well, that we need to keep people aware that there are things out there that they can cut out, and because they're so sophisticated, it's very easy to be scammed. I could literally. I'll wrap up there.
Yeah. I do want, and some of these
Yeah.
things may come up from other members as well. So, Deputy Chair, then Ciara, and then I'm going to Brian.
Just first and foremost, thanks very much, Jerry, for your years of service and the excellent work that you have done and the detailed reports that you have highlighted and worked really, really well on. Just one area I wanted to look at we haven't mentioned, it's around housing, and it's a key area for us, and particularly now when we'll be moving forward with housing supply strategy. Could you just give me some kind of detail from your experience and people approaching yourself in relation to, you had mentioned about we must adapt obviously with a new housing model, and particularly maybe what's your engagement in relation to the development of the housing supply strategy that is due out for consultation in the new year?
Yeah, well, this it probably hasn't been a top priority in the sense we've done some work in relation to housing and linking in with housing, and I've spoken at several events on housing over the years. It's definitely an area where, again, there needs to be a lot of progress made on, changing the conversation about what the ageing population needs. And it's back to this, looking at the different stages of life and the types of housing that are required and the accessibility of housing. But there is still a big issue with older people living in old, damp, fuel inefficient houses that are too big for them, that are not do not meet their needs, but they want to cling on to them because they want to pass them down to children or whatever. And there is still a culture in Northern Ireland where that is the case a lot. Whereas to me the big issue is probably a discussion. Well, there's two issues. There's the discussion to get in people's heads about what housing needs they need in later life and what would be best for them. And I think that's the discussion for people to be having ahead of the time, to be thinking. But the big issue then is what is the housing options? What's the housing supply? So, a lot of older people would, and when they do have the option of selling a house and maybe moving into a smaller house or apartment, they find that attractive. And I know a lot of older people who have done that. But quite often the options aren't there, and it comes down a bit of a postcode lottery, depending where you're living. There's a rural-urban aspect to this as well. There's an issue around community as well, because people might, want to move, but then find the type of housing they want takes them away from the local community that they've lived all their lives in, and there's an issue around that as well. There's a big, even, I know just from personal experience, an older couple in a street who lived in the same street as me a few years ago, they were had always lived there their whole lives in Belfast, and the lady had real problems getting up and down stairs, and they wanted a bungalow, and they found it impossible to get a bungalow in Belfast, and had to leave Belfast, and and they left their community because they said they didn't want to do it, but just said they simply couldn't get a bungalow that would meet her needs. So it's a big question. I think it's something again that falls under the whole planning for the ageing population. That what sort of housing do we want? And I think older people have to be part of that conversation as well. I don't think it should be planners who are just deciding these are the types of houses we build. I think you've got to have good consultation with people and saying, look, what are the sorts of housing options that would appeal to you in later life? And I think that's going to be something that, I think if you get, modern housing that is, very accessible, then it benefits lots of different groups in society. It's not just older people, it's people with disabilities. It can be people, you know, with young children who need extra space for prams and stuff. So I think it's having that real discussion about what people's needs are, and then looking at I suppose the developers and to say, you know, what can be done here. There's a lot of talk about, and a lot of people have raised issues with me around, you know, there's no retirement communities here. You know, in other places of the world, that's become a popular thing. And I think that there's something in that as well, because I think there would be a lot of advantages for people. You know, a lot more people are living alone now later in life. There are a lot of issues around, concerns around fear of crime as a big issue, about scams. So there's an issue around, I know a lot of people said they would like the thought that they could live in a community where they would have even social, you know, that they could meet friends and have people to speak to. Maybe they don't have any family about. But I think there's advantages for the system in looking at that as well, because if you're, for example, providing health care services to groups like that, you could see the advantages of providing social care if you had a retirement village, you know, just in terms of house to house and provision like that. But these are all big issues. And again, it's looking at it from a strategic point of view and saying, like, how many people are we going to have a certain age? What are their needs going to be? And what do those people want? What do they want? You know, and I think that's the thing. You need to make it attractive to people as well, and you need to then sell that to people and say, this would be actually the better thing would be, it's not good for you to sitting in a big property that you can't heat. It's not good for your health, and here's better options that would appeal to people. But I think those conversations have to happen at an earlier stage and get that into the culture a bit more.
No, thank you just for highlighting that, because I think it does kind of, in previous conversations we had regarding the place shaping team and in planning here regarding housing supply, it's not just looking at the current waiting list to dictate what is required. It's about forecasting ahead and actually listening to older people for their options. Because I know in Derry, over 50 schemes that are being built, there is thousands looking to move on to the likes of these over 50 schemes, but they can't get through the planning system and stuff. So it's, I'm glad for highlighting that. There was just one other area, and I know it's a balancing act, and it's critically important in planning ahead and supporting for active ageing. But there is another area, and how do you get the balance? Because I'm living in an area, and I'm a representative of the Foyle constituency, and particularly west, the northwest. Life expectancy there is well short of the average life expectancy. In some areas, it can be 12, 13 years. So there's a balancing act of how you resource and where you invest. You're investing to support our ageing population, but the communities that I represent, very few get to an age and a good quality of life. So just your thoughts on it, that's all I'm asking, around that balance between where you invest, how you invest, because it is difficult regarding health, for instance. Where do you invest your resources and make adjustments for older population, but you have areas of need whereby people, down as age 56 is one of the average if you go down to output area level in some of the neighbourhoods that I represent.
It's a really, really good point. And, again, it brings back to the sort of the all-age approach, I think, to ageing, because the ageing starts the minute you're born, and you age at different levels throughout your life. I think this is where you're back to the focus has to be making people healthier. And that's not just, when you reach 50 or 60. It's about that sort of life course of how do you increase the chances of people living healthier lifestyles. I mean, I'm passionate about sport, and I think, that sort of healthy options for young people to get into. And I think that there's actually been a real shift where a lot younger people now are living a lot healthier lives than they would have been 15, 20 years ago. And that's something that's really, really positive, and that comes a lot from activities and sport. I mean, I personally, involved in coaching my daughter's football team. She's been playing football for years. That was unheard of when I was growing up. Girls didn't play football, but that was always a big, teenage girls staying involved in sport was a big problem, years ago. But that's something that we're seeing improvements made. But that's going to have those sorts of things will have knock-on impacts. The more you have people at younger ages staying active, staying fit, those are things that are going to help the population. But you're absolutely right. You've the different stages of life that you're trying to get. You're trying to get messaging out there for people around healthy lifestyle and all of that. But you have to address the underlying causes of it as well. And there's things like poverty, and all of these factors contribute to the situation. So there's no easy solution, but it's absolutely shocking. When you're saying, the lifespan. I always, when I hear that stat, think, to think of certain areas here, your lifespan is maybe 13, 14 years less than other areas. It's really shocking. And, that's what we're talking about here. But so my focus has always been on, in this job, obviously the over 60s and how we keep people healthier then. But it is a wider conversation, because that starts, if you arrive at 60 as a relatively healthy person, you have an advantage then going into your 70s and your 80s, that you've more chance of staying healthy. And it is about, it's not about years on life necessarily, it's about the quality of life. And I think everyone wants that. People want, that they don't want to have a long time of their life living in poor health. Yeah. People would prefer, and I think that's a challenge in society, is to say, how do we move the bar here, that we're actually getting larger amounts of our population staying healthier for longer. And again, it's back to the point, it's good for the individual, but it's good for society, and it's good for services.
Thank you, Ciara. Brian.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Eddie, and Majid, obviously TEHO committee as well. But it's very useful paper that you're leaving behind. It's very good information and recommendations in it. Just to mention one thing, I do wonder how the current generation, as they get older, having more experience with IT, as they were growing up, whether that will be a benefit, because I know that is a concern for many older people. A lot of basic functions in your household now, turn on a TV, use a telephone, even turn the oven or the hob on, the number of buttons you have to push and to know how to operate things, never mind a computer. And I think that people can become isolated, when they, and I saw that with both my parents, trying to have a very basic phone for them and so on, things that just everything in IT is more complicated now, But I want to ask you about two matters. One, you mentioned about an adult protection bill is ready to go. So I'm not familiar with this. And you have a piece in your paper about adult safeguarding.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that then?
Yeah, well, basically, it was the number one recommendation out of my Home Truths report. It identified that the current legislation there was broke. It was outdated and fragmented. So this piece of work has been being worked on for the last couple of years by officials, and it is, as far as I know, it is pretty much complete. So now it's at a stage where it really, now my question is, when does it come before the Assembly? I was due to meet with the Minister on Tuesday, where I was going to ask him for an update about when that, and unfortunately, given other events, that had to be postponed. But my question now, I suppose, is if that is legislation is ready to be put to the Assembly, I want to see that happen as soon as possible and without delay, because it's a critical piece of legislation that I think will provide better protection for many vulnerable groups across society, because it's all adults.
That's within DFC then, when you say officials, is it?
No, it's health.
Oh, within health?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes.
Maybe that's why I'm not as familiar with it.
Yeah, so it's no, it's with the health minister. So and again, I just would want to stress the importance of getting that bill through.
Okay, well, it's maybe something we can chase up as well.
Yeah,
certainly relevant. Look, and the second one is the whole issue of this week, the assisted dying bill at Westminster. Other people call it assisted dying, euthanasia, assisted suicide. And I appreciate this as a complex matter, and all parties, I think, have a free vote on it. And I don't know whether your office has taken a position. You will be lobbied from people with views on both sides of the debate. Obviously, myself and Morris, we're very much a pro-life party. We believe in the dignity, of respecting life, and palliative care and very much a message of supporting people in their older life to live a quality life. What I would ask you, have you, I don't know whether you've said anything publicly about this or not, it is such a major issue, you know, that it's like the elephant in the room that cannot be ignored, but have you, in terms of what has happened internationally, and I think I understand in Canada now, it almost the number of situations, I think they call it MAID, medical assistance in dying, the number of situations is growing. It's around 4% of all deaths, according to statistics in Canada now, and 30% increases each year. And just how, over time, the circumstances in which it is permitted and the restrictions on it, the circumstances can increase and the restriction can decrease over time, and what that message sends out about valuing people in their later life. And I understand all the complexities of people and that certain people want to have this option. Yeah. But in terms of how it has expanded in countries over time.
Yeah, well, I haven't taken a position up to now, and frankly, it hasn't really come to me in my term of office. But obviously, I've been watching the debate in Westminster very closely. Also been linking up with a lot of age organisations in GB as well to see what they're getting back, because obviously, because it's a live matter now in Westminster, there's a lot of engagement happening with older people there. And it's a very complex issue. It's an issue that older people have a wide variety of views on. You know, it's not as if older people have a view for it or against it. People are very much opposed to it and very much in favour, and a lot of people in between who are looking at the different circumstances and how it could play. There are, you know, I can understand you know, why some people are calling for it in terms of the quality of life and that, but I also recognise, given my work, how there are dangers in that as well. You know, when you see vulnerabilities, when we see some of the cases that we deal with, when we see some of the cases where people are coerced by families on issues, not on issues like this, but on issues, for example, like financial abuse and stuff. And unfortunately, we've had cases of that where it's quite disturbing to see the role family members sometimes play in these things. I can understand where people are saying, what does this mean? The other thing, you know, and I've been reflecting on this a bit in the last few weeks as the debate's been raging on it, and, you know, it sort of reminded me of some of the commentary that there was during the COVID pandemic, where there was some really distasteful commentary in national newspapers about people saying, well, you know, if this literally kills off tens of thousands of older people, that might actually be a good thing for our economy. It might solve some of the pressures on our health system and things like this. So when you hear things like that actually being stated in well-established papers, then, you know, it does make you aware of the thinking behind a lot of this. And I think the protection of life is really important. But at the same time, there are people I know personally who have really, really suffered in the last stages of their life as well. And, you know, that's an issue that you have to look at as well, the level of suffering people face and what's the best way to deal with that. So it's, as I say, it's not going to be something for my term. The new commissioner will, I'm sure this debate will come to these shores at some stage. To me, it would be something, and we have had some discussions in the office, I would feel that we would have to have a lot of engagement with older people on this issue. I also think it's important to speak to people at different times of their lives as well, because I think people's view on these sorts of things can change. You know, you might have an opinion on this when you're younger, which might change. You know, so when you're asking people, are you asking people who are a certain age? Are you asking people who have an illness? You know, and I think you've got to really get that broad opinion on the issues and really look at it. And I suppose because it hasn't come to Northern Ireland up to now, you know, probably as a policy issue, we haven't, focused in and looked at all the ins and outs of all, globally where this has happened. We've touched on it a wee bit, but I think if it was to come here and became an issue for the Assembly, I think that would be something that, the Coveney office would be all over it and look into. I mean, I think none of the age organisations in GB have taken a position on it up to now. They've remained neutral on the question, but I think there is an element of they see that might change as this progresses as an issue.
Okay. Listen, thank you very much. I just want to say briefly, just to tack back to the security of tenure issue while you were discussing that issue. It strikes me, and I do know from previous experience as well as being an MLA, that issue can arise often as a result of complaints, and I think that's a really particularly problematic, because any system that doesn't encourage and facilitate openly complaints, and if there's any chill factor around people's ability to complain, that's bad for the system as well as bad for clearly individuals within it. So I just want to make that point. I also want to thank you, Eddie, for the work you have done. I think you have done a really excellent job in terms of keeping those issues around ageing and older people at the centre of discussions throughout large periods of time, and also in a way that has focused on that active and contribution element of it all. It hasn't been done from a position of weakness in that sense. It's been around flagging up the strengths of having people living longer and the importance of having them living well longer. So I want to thank you for all of that work, and we will tack now in terms of any other work, but thanks both yourself and Angel. Thank you both very much for your work.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, members, so just to briefly check with you before we go on to our final couple of items, is there any follow-up actions emerging from this session that members wish to flag up? Kelly, go ahead.
Can we please write to the department about that care home and security of tenure issue to ask that some consideration is given in legislation then to how we can ensure that care homes are included as private landlords, or how that definition can be extended to include care homes, please.
Yeah. Okay, members content with that? Yeah. Okay, members, thank you. So, go ahead, Brian.
Am I right to the Department of Health about that adult protection bill?
Yeah, members content that we
should just ask what is the position of it?
Timescale for bringing it forward?
Yeah, adult protection, adult safeguarding legislation. Yeah.
And Chair, just what's in line to replace the active ageing strategy?
Yeah.
You know, because it's ended in 2022.
Yep. Thank you, Morris, and thank you, members. Clerk, you've got that, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, members, so forward work programme then is at page 407. Can I draw your attention to the scheduling of the committee's motions on welfare supplementary payments for Monday 9th of December? That's provisionally for 3:30, so that's just to flag that for your diaries. Members, I also wish to highlight the motion on Homelessness Awareness Week 2024, which will take place on Monday the 2nd of December in plenary, and encourage you all to support that and to get involved in that debate. In addition, for diary planning following on after next week's Homelessness Week, our committee meeting will take place in Clooney Hall in Derry City on the 12th of December. That's the North West Methodist Mission, where we will undertake our normal essential business and then hear directly from both First Housing and the Methodist Mission in relation to their support projects and work on the ground locally. So I just want to flag that is, a very particular focus on homelessness that the committee are undertaking during that meeting. Do members have any other comments or are they content to note the forward work programme?
Can I just double check? So the first week of December, the Homelessness Week, we're not going to Derry that week, it's the following
week.
Okay.
We're going.
Can I just give my apologies in advance? Unfortunately, as Chair of Procedures, I'm going to Edinburgh to look at electronic voting. So I won't be here next week, but I am here for the debate. Yeah.
Okay. Yep, thank you, Kelly. Okay, members content note forward work?
And I wasn't aware of that. So we're going to Londonderry on the 12th then?
Yeah.
Right, just have a meeting in my diary for 2:15. But what time does our meeting finish at that day? Around normal time, whatever?
We'd usually go to 12:31.
Right, and then have we a bit of a visit while we're there?
No, they're coming to Clooney Hall.
Right, okay. I might put it back slightly just to, so I'm not totally rushing back. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Brian.
Well, it's always good to visit that part of the world.
Okay, members, agenda item 10, any other business? Members of any other business? No, thank you. And final agenda item 11, date, time and location of next meeting. Our next meeting, members, will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 5th of December 2024 here in room 29 in Parliament Buildings. The meeting is now adjourned, and I would ask the clerk to take us out of broadcasting, and that will take a few minutes.
Committee Room 29, sound. 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 Committee Room 29, sound.